Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. We are still in Computex, so this is a Computex Q&A series, and we find ourselves in a nice restaurant here, so we're going to get some drinks and stuff and work through all of your questions. But before we do, the Harbour Unboxed Computex coverage is brought to you by MSI, Thermal Grizzly, G-Skill and Trix. Check out MSI's range of X870 and B850 motherboards built for the latest AMD Ryzen 9000 series with support for full-speed PCIe 5.0, DDR5 8400+, with aggressive tuning and easy expo profiles. One-click overclocking, extreme power delivery with up to 110 amp power stages, USB 4 as standard on X870 models, along with Wi-Fi 7 and at least 5 gigabit LAN. Learn more about MSI's range of X870 and B850 motherboards via the links in the video description. Also supporting our Computex trip this year is Thermal Grizzly and their Duranaut high-performance thermal paste, offering extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity. It's not electrically conductive and won't harden over time. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. All right, Tim, upscaling related question here, so I'm going to hand this one straight off to you. Do you think FSR3 will still be updated, or will this be the end of the road for previous gen AMD GPUs? So I guess that's hinting at like FSR 3.5, which you might have suggested to be the version of FSR4.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty close to end of the road for FSR3 and older AMD GPUs. It's, you know, here at Computex they announced FSR Redstone, which is like the next generation version of FSR with additional features, AI-based frame gen, neural radiance caching, I think they call it ray regeneration, and all of that is AI-based or ML-based, which requires a new RDNA 4 architecture. So with all the development effort going into those features, I don't think we'll see too many FSR3 upgrades, so like non-AI-based upscaling. You might get a few, you know, FSR 3.1.4 or something as an update, but nothing substantial. We also asked questions in the press Q&A session about FSR 4 coming to older GPUs, because that has been rumored, sort of backporting it from RDNA 4 to RDNA 3 in older architectures. They seem to be a bit more clear this time around that that's unlikely to happen. At CES, when we first asked about that, they kind of left it open, up in the air. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. This was more of a more unlikely than likely by the sounds of things. That's because at least what they were saying is effectively they've tried it, they've tested it, the experience isn't great, and it requires a lot more work to make that a reality. So they haven't fully shut the door, but it's leaning more unlikely. So I think if you've got one of those older AMD GPUs, unfortunately, there's probably not going to be too many more of these software innovations. So yeah.
All right, if you're playing a game at 35 FPS, sounds rough, would 60 with frame generation be worse, or would it just be worse than 60 real FPS?
Well, it's definitely worse than 60 real FPS. That's unquestionable. I think anyone that's used frame generation would immediately know that.
And it's not just a little bit worse, it's night and day. Like it's a very bad experience in comparison.
I think the issue with this example is, right, like you say 35 FPS, frame gen up to 60 FPS. Because of the overhead of frame generation, you're actually losing latency performance when you enable frame gen. So frame gen is going to take you from a 35 FPS latency experience down to 30 FPS to get 60 FPS frame gen. So the game will feel worse to play when you enable frame gen. That's the real issue, because I feel like if there was no overhead associated with frame gen, then you could quite comfortably say something like, well, it just is doubling your frame rate, so it's looking smoother, but the latency is unaffected. But the problem is that the latency is affected, and so there's no like easy way around it really. You're just going to have to accept that there is some sort of penalty on one side to get the advantage of smoothness in the other side. And so in those situations, like, yeah, 60 FPS with frame generation is a lot smoother looking than 35 FPS. So it's going to have a visual advantage for you while gaming. But yeah, just the latency side of things, especially when you're talking like 30 to 35, 30 to 40 FPS, it's quite noticeable in my opinion, especially in single player games, that it's laggier, you know, it's not responding to your controls as well. So at least that's just my thoughts on that. So I would love to see a world where you could easily generate frames and there's no real penalty, and then it would change that discussion a little bit, but with the penalty as it is, and the penalty does get higher when you enable, say, 3x, 4x multi-frame gen, yeah, it's just not where it is at the moment.
All right, Tim, are you on Nvidia's blacklist now? So have we been blacklisted by Nvidia, which We have been there temporarily in the past. Are we back there yet?
Well, I think it's too early to know.
I hope not.
So to be fair, like, you know, at Computex, we haven't exactly had tons of interactions with Nvidia. They're not having a big Computex, or they haven't had a big Computex, no real major gaming announcements. So there's no real reason for us to organize meetings or interact with them at this show. Obviously they had a press conference, there was the 5060 around this time, but no cool new features to see. So normally at Computex, right, we would organise meetings and... Oh, thanks, Valen. Thank you.
I like this Q&A setup.
you.
This is really good.
So, yeah, essentially, no real reason to interact with them. Normally we would, because they'd have something to show, and then we would get a sort of feel for what are the vibes like with Nvidia. They are staying at the same hotel that we're staying at, and so we have seen Nvidia employees, and there's been some looks exchanged and a couple of words here and there, but honestly, I don't think they will blacklist us. I think that would be a monumentally stupid decision on their part, especially after what happened about 5 years ago now. I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, I agree. We don't expect them to be happy with the content that we've made at Computex, but at the end of the day, it's all accurate, and really they brought it on themselves. Like the whole RTX 5060 review program, just silly, obviously pissed off media globally, I would say, and then a lot of you guys aren't happy with the fact that they've tried to hide that product, and it's a mainstream, very popular product. So it's not like it's, it's a GT, 1030 type product or something like that. Gamers don't care about that, it's not for them. Very weird way of going about it. And again, completely unnecessary, really from multiple different angles there. They didn't need to do it in terms of competition. And the 5060, while it'd be good with more VRAM, it's not an absolutely atrocious product. It is cheaper than the 5060 Ti. There is only one configuration. So in my opinion, it is nowhere near as bad as what we saw with the 5060 Ti, which I think I conveyed in my review. Anyway, just obviously they're not wrapped with the coverage, but at the same time, it's really their fault. So I don't know what you want from me.
Yep. Has Jensen hired any Dark Brotherhood assassins yet? Not that I'm aware of, but...
At least at the point of shooting this video, certainly not that we're aware of.
Are there snipers up there? There's a very large high-rise building across from where we're sitting, so... No, I don't see any snipers at the moment. I don't think Jensen will hire snipers. I honestly don't think Jensen cares all that much about these sorts of dramas or these sorts of issues. I think it's largely down to the GeForce team executives controlling this. Obviously, Nvidia seems to have a very flat structure in terms of a lot of executives report directly to Jensen. But if you saw their Computex keynote, it's like 100% AI. It would be 105 or 110% AI if that was possible. So they're just focused on other areas. They're not worrying about assassinating journalists for doing RTX 5060 exposés. If we were doing the same thing with their Blackwell server grade, huge $100,000 things, maybe we'd need to hire, wear some bulletproof vests and helmets and stuff, but...
Be more of a concern for sure.
Yeah, but for gaming GPUs that they appear to not care about, they barely discuss them, try and hide them, it's whatever, they're just out there. Yeah, no need to hide from their assassins just yet. But you never know, maybe we'll head back to Australia and they've, booby-trapped our houses or something, but we'll find out. How much sleep did you guys get during the 5060 review? I genuinely felt bad for you guys. I wish you all have a good rest once this release period is over.
Well, thanks. Don't feel bad for us though. We kind of enjoy this. I liked the challenge. A little bit disappointed I couldn't give you, the in-depth review that I would normally provide, but we were still able to provide some sort of review, and I think for the gaming performance, we really were able to nail that down. So that was good. The sleep thing wasn't too bad, nothing we haven't trained for again. So, these releases, I've certainly done a lot of crazy deadline releases in, many years ago now. It's gotten a lot better probably over the last 5 to 6 years.
Yep.
But anyway, it all went pretty smoothly. There was no dramas. It was nowhere near the kind of headache we have with releases where, the driver changes last minute, or we filmed the whole video and they adjust pricing, or that's much more stressful and much more difficult to deal with. This was pretty straightforward, really. Had everything ready to go the second the driver dropped, just got straight to it. I think it was about 6 hours of testing or something like that. And then, admittedly, I did throw the script together pretty quickly. The boys did all the B-roll, and then Balin edited it together while I had a bit of a rest. So, yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I think obviously it's a little different for us having to organize some sort of test system here in Taipei when normally you just have access to all that at home. But that isn't like a, cutting down on our sleep sort of situation. That's all just the organization that we do for these sorts of trade shows. So once we realized that, the 5060, I think originally we did think the 5060 would be able to review it before we got here.
Yep.
Like we would have drivers, we'd be able to publish the review on May 19th or May 20th, and that would be done pre-show. So we'd get here, we'd just start covering the other show stuff. Then when it turned out the drivers would not be available, which was luckily that, some of the other media were reporting. For us, it was more like they just didn't really respond to emails, they didn't really comment, but it seems like in other regions they got more concrete comments, which allowed us to sort of think, okay, review driver's not going to be available. We'll have to do some testing during the show. Can we do that? And so then we started organizing with MSI, who brought us to Computex. So shout out to MSI for bringing us here. They also organized a lot of the test system stuff that we just can't bring from Australia feasibly. So we're not going to be lugging a huge case with an ATX motherboard in it all the way from Australia. They provided some of the things in an identical configuration to what you use at home. And then you supplied a few extra parts, brought those over, and we were ready to go for the review. We were basically sitting there refreshing the driver page for at least 6 hours on the day prior, because we weren't sure when the driver would be released. We weren't sure when the card, like the exact time it was being released. So we just waited until that happened. We were going out for dinner, refreshing the page, and then I think late at night, one of the nights, it was finally hit. And I think you even waited till the next morning to start testing, so it wasn't like you stayed up overnight trying to...
No, I got up early, got into it, quick breakfast, got back into it. We cleared the schedule, so that day I didn't have anything on, so I was able to just lock myself away in the hotel room. And Tim kept coming and checking on me now and then, make sure I was still upright and working away. And I wasn't confident I'd be able to get it done, but Tim's like, no, you've got this. So a lot of support coming from Tim. But yeah, we got there in the end, so that was great.
Well, it's a really interesting one, because I think it, in some ways, obviously that process, Nvidia trying to bury it, has backfired on them just because it's been widely reported now. I think it's backfired on them from a second perspective though, in that AMD announced the 9060 XT around the time people were starting to create their review coverage or their testing of the cards, including your coverage. And while you published your review before we could publish the 9060 XT information, so the NDA was after you published it, obviously we had been briefed on that information before then. So that could be sort of worked in a little bit to some of the conclusions. We could sort of think a little bit about how the competitive parts would go.
What you're saying is normally we would say in an RTX 5060 review, such as this with the timing, the 9060 XT is expected to be announced. We're not sure what's on offer there, but we suggest you guys wait, see what AMD announces, and then wait for the reviews and make your purchasing decision then. But we were already armed with at least the first party claims of what was going to be on offer there. So we had a pretty good idea of what to expect. Of course, we've still got to go away and test them, but should be pretty ballpark with what AMD is claiming. So we know that you would, if they can hit those MSRPs, you're certainly going to be better off buying a 9060 XT than you are a 5060. So it sort of shuts those reviews down straight away before they even have to release the products.
Yeah, and that wouldn't have happened had they allowed reviews on May 19th, because let's say we were working on our review during the days leading up to that, we did not get pricing information, performance claims for the 9060 XT. That was all very speculative, and it could have gone either way, right? Like it could have been a really great value product that they were, at least the proposition of what they were advertising, or it could have been poor and we just didn't know. But by the time it came around to doing that review, we'd gotten pre-briefed on the upcoming GPUs, and so we had much more concrete information, which I think works against Nvidia. Ideally they wouldn't have had that information out there by the time people were covering it, because it kind of changes the narrative. Like I remember you were showing some of the cost per frame data, and we were looking at it, and it wasn't that bad. But then I had literally just come back from the briefing from AMD, and I was ready to tell Steve all of what the 9060 XT was going to be, and we had a couple of discussions, and that we came to the conclusion that if the claims are accurate, it's probably going to change the value proposition of the 5060 series more so than it might otherwise have been. So it probably didn't backfire too much, because by the time people probably weren't that interested in the 5060, it was already being slammed from all angles. But there's just another thing that adds into it, is like Nvidia made a mistake that blew up in their face, and it kind of blew up again because it pushed content after
Yeah.
their competitor was able to respond effectively.
And the sales information that we've been able to get information on at this point in time suggests that the RTX 5060 is not selling well at all. So not a popular card. Doesn't seem to be that much availability either, which is a bit odd. But yeah, people just aren't lining up to get them or really buying them at all. We heard from some retailers they'd sold one, maybe none. So not good first day sales. I don't know if anything's picked up since then. I haven't been in contact with them in the following days, but at least on release day was not selling well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's largely going to be a card for system integrators and pre-built systems, which is one of the angles that we've had and complained about a lot over the years. Is these 8GB cards at a high price are getting put into these systems. People don't know any better. The casual buyers buying them, then they can't play their favorite games. So that's a problem. So even though for DIY sales, I'm not exactly surprised after this huge saga that's happened. I think the Gamers Nexus video has got like 1 million views sort of thing. It's all sort of blown up, and I'm not surprised that that's caused people to assess Nvidia and sort of not buy some of those products in the DIY market. But they're still going to sell a boatload of those cards. Like, even though we're saying maybe they've sold one card at our local retailers, the Steam charts are still going to show 5060 as one of the most popular GPUs for that reason.
Yeah, which is a misleading way to measure the actual popularity of a product, because again, if you don't have an alternative option, or that's just what's going to be in a computer that you buy, because most people just buy pre-built systems, then that's what props up the numbers of that particular model. Yeah,
it's more based on the deals that Nvidia is able to do with partners, as opposed to the free market deciding that that particular card is worthy of the highest spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any Nvidia RTX 5060 Computex launch chatter among the industry, or is it mainly talked about in the reviewer community? Well, it's certainly been talked about in the reviewer community. We've gotten a lot of questions about how we did the 5060 review, what we were feeling about the whole review process from other creators. So that's certainly been happening. From the AIB side of things, it's been really interesting talking to them about these products, because while we're obviously very concerned about this 8GB GPU Plague 5060 Ti, those sort of, and 5060 products, the IBs don't seem very concerned about those cards at all, really. There seems to just be an acceptance that they're still going to sell a boatload of these things. They're going to go into system integrator models. They're going to go into pre-builts. And so they're not overly concerned. And we even heard things like, while the DIY market is important, even before all this, they would have been expecting the majority of 5060s to go into those systems, and so they're not really expecting too much impact from that. And that even applies to things like the 5060 Ti 8GB. So while we can sit here and talk about like 16GB model is obviously the better model that people should buy, don't buy the 8GB card, AIBs are not sweating over the, they've made a bunch of 5060 Ti 8GB that they can't sell now. They've made them fully with the understanding that they will be able to sell those to non-DIY markets, which is, just very interesting to obviously hear that insight. Something we're aware of, like they make those cards not really for this audience. It's something that Nvidia's tried to sort of suggest to us as being true. That doesn't, obviously they've used it as an excuse. It's not an excuse, because it means that the DIY products, or at least the pre-builds people are buying, are bad, and that's bad. So it's definitely still bad. But at least what they, Nvidia says when they say 5060s are largely for people who don't know any better is kind of the case, which, it's just really disappointing that they're sort of, I guess, leveraging that knowledge to create cards that are so underwhelming. Like, if AIBs are telling them like, we sell like 70% of our 5060s to, non-DIY channels, then Nvidia's like, probably rubbing their hands together going like, good money making opportunity now, instead of having to spend an extra $20 on another 8GB of GDDR7 memory, or $30 or whatever it costs, right? They can save that $30. Brilliant for margins, brilliant for their bottom line, and that seems to be exactly what they're doing with these cards. DIY market be damned. So it's got an interesting perspective here from one of our Patreon members on Discord, who says, are we barking up the wrong tree? I think system integrators deserve a significant part of the blame for the continued success of 8GB or worse GPUs. For example, my brother-in-law and his wife bought an NZXT system with a 3050 6GB in it about a year ago. No rational person should have done this. For the record, I only learned this happened after the fact, when that piece of crap had already arrived. arrived. I offered to give them a 3060 12 gigabyte, not much better, but definitely better. It's actually quite a bit faster as well.
Yeah, it's
not
much
just the
better
VRAM.
product, yeah.
But they didn't want to void the warranty. Computer component sales thrive on consumer ignorance. So what do we think about that?
Well, first of all, are they to blame for the 8 gigabyte thing? I don't think so, because it's Nvidia and AMD that provide the cards. Now they might do so with direction from partners and stuff like that, and essentially they are their primary customers really, because they're buying the bulk cards for their systems. Where do you place the blame? Like, really, they're all to blame. But at the end of the day, if they're asking Nvidia to make the product and they're able to sell it without any problem, that's like kind of how the free market works.
I don't think AIB's, the people making pre-builts and all that sort of thing are directing AMD and Nvidia to specifically make 8 gigabyte cards to make the computers that they sell bad.
We haven't looked into that. We don't have evidence of it. This is just an assumption based on the question.
This is just an assumption. I don't think they would be doing that. I think the main thing that they're concerned about are the cost of the product. So, as is always the case with pre-builts and that sort of thing, they make thousands of units. So if they can save $20, $30 per unit
while still advertising the same product,
then they will absolutely take that. That's why you often see pre-builts, and not necessarily from the boutique manufacturers, but certainly the big manufacturers like Dell, HP, they use very low quality motherboards. So just really cut down on all the components. They're designed basically specifically for whatever's in those systems, with no thought to upgradability, no thought to VRMs, but they can still advertise certain chipsets, certain processors that are on those motherboards, because those are legitimately the parts that are in there. So I think that's mainly what the system integrators are concerned about. And we know as well that a company like Nvidia isn't going to be willing to create a better product that costs more to manufacture at the same price. They're very resistant to that. So if it turned out that a 5060, for example, making that 16 gigabyte added $30 worth of components, they're not going to eat that cost. They're not going to just be like, yeah, we'll just lower our margins. Absolutely not the way they're operating at the moment. That is probably KPIs for their executives and stuff. And with the AI stuff, they don't want the gaming segment dragging down the overall margins of the company, because margins are very important for investors, all that sort of thing, right? So you got those two factors, that the DIY, the pre-built makers want to save $20 per component. Nvidia is not going to give you a better card for a lower price, and so what do? They start cutting down on the quality of the product. And the best way to do that is to remove half of the VRAM chips that should be on there, because that can save them $20 or $30. You see that as well. The pre-builts often use low quality coolers, all that sort of thing. They're trying to nickel and dime the customer to hit a certain price point. So is that the fault of the system integrators, that they're saying we can't afford to add an extra $20 into this product? I would say that is probably a reasonable thing that a business would want to do. It's more on the companies like Nvidia and AMD that the product that they have on offer for that segment is so bad. And in history, we have seen those products be better. There has been times when the lowest end models for system integrators have actually been reasonable. Of course, there's been lots of dodgy stuff like OEM only cards that have cut down memory, or even worse. It was even worse previously when you got like a 1063 gigabyte, which didn't just cut down the memory, it cut down the GPU core and all sorts of other things as well. So that was worse. We don't see as much of that these days, though it still does happen with the 3056 gigabyte that was used in this example, right? But yeah, I don't want to fully absolve Dell and HP as well, but I just don't think that's the issue.
Yeah, you're right. Well, they're not the source of the problem is the people who are making the components. So the outside demand is less of an issue.
I think if anything, the only thing that maybe we could blame system integrators for is the naming side of things. System integrators are often obscuring important facts about the products that they produce, and so if there's an incentive from them to go, well, can you just make a card that is very similar to what you already have but is cheaper for us to buy, I could see that happening. Again, this is speculation. We don't have evidence that they're doing this. I'm just thinking about how a business may operate, and I could see that happening. That said, Nvidia and AMD are still enabling that behavior. So a good company would go, let's say HP or Dell or whoever's asking Nvidia, like, yeah, but can you just make like a slightly worse 5060 Ti for us that costs us $50 less? A good company would go, no, that makes the product bad for consumers. People would be buying a GeForce GPU. They're not able to play the games they want to play. That hurts our brand. And so they'd prevent that from happening.
Yeah, they don't want to make it confusing either. They want it to be clear to the consumer what they're buying, what's advertised, what they're buying. They're not getting an RTX 5060 Ti and then later learning they got half the VRAM because that's an option.
Yeah, and I think another thing that you've brought up in the past has been planned obsolescence. Like, it benefits the system integrators and the GPU makers that these cards don't last as long.
Well, it benefits everyone who's making money off your purchase because you're more likely to give them more money more regularly than you would if the product lasted longer, which is why people are calling 8GB GPUs in 2025 for gaming e-waste. Because it doesn't really matter if you're an esports gamer or whatever, you're probably going to play other games in the future.
Yeah.
Those games are almost certainly going to require more than 8GB of VRAM to be enjoyed in the way that that GPU should allow you to enjoy the game.
Yeah, as I was mentioning with the motherboard angle, throughout history we see OEM builds with really poor upgradability. So they're already well known to be not exactly wanting you to just be able to slot in easy DIY upgrades to make your PC better. They want you to go back and buy another HP, Dell, Lenovo system and then throw out your whole old computer. And so by making 8GB cards that don't last as long and having to spend more to get cards with longevity, they're ensuring that that gamer is going to go back to the system integrators. I think that's partly why as well we see like not as much upgradability with Intel motherboards and Intel CPUs, because Intel is still very, very, very popular with system integrators, and so by preventing CPU upgrades for a long period of time, they can get people coming back to the stores once things are they need more performance from their system, which is, again, like, it's not a great thing for the consumer. You want to see maximum upgradability, maximum longevity. That's just not how the system works.
Finally, a big thank you to G-Skill and Trix for helping to make our Computex trip possible this year. G-Skill offers an amazing range of DDR5 memory with AMD Expo support, allowing you to get the most out of your Ryzen processor, and we've been using their Trident Z5 Neo memory in our test systems for years now, as we rely on it to get the best results. We've also started using Trix coolers, and I've got to say the Panorama SE 360 Black is one of the best looking AIOs I've ever seen. The quality of the rotatable display is incredible, and as complex as the design appears, it's remarkably quick and easy to install. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. All right, we're going to hit pause there on part 1 of the Q&A series, but we do have part 2 planned and possibly a part 3 because there was a lot of great questions and I think they deserve answers, Tim.
I agree.
So we'll do that. Might have to get Tim another drink. And yeah, we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks for watching. If you want to get more Hardware Unboxed goodness, we have the join button, Patreon. You can sign up to either one of those, get access to our exclusive Discord server where we've been uploading lots of amazing photos from the show. Yep. Mostly Tim just sitting around, I think. Live streams, behind the scenes content, and what else do we do? There's another thing, right? I'm forgetting a thing.
Discord chat?
I said Discord.
Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Sign up to find what the missing thing is. I'm sure it's amazing. Anyway, I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.